So I want to tell everybody a story. So let's think for a moment back to 1945. It was the end of one war and the beginning of another. Now, this new war, right? When we think about war, we think about guns and battlefields, right? This wasn't a war like that. This was more of a war of ideology. It was a war of first, if you will. A war of first in space, first in Olympic ice hockey. And really, it was just a war of first to break new grounds. Despite many failed attempts, and several that unfortunately end tragically, in 1945, the USA focused their efforts on achieving the impossible. They decided to set a goal of flying faster than the speed of sound. Now, no vehicle had ever crossed that line. And it seemed that the closer anyone got, the more resistance they met. And in fact, many attempts ended in the plane literally shaking itself into pieces. Now, question for everyone in the audience. How did we achieve such an endeavor back in 1945? Yeah, by setting a goal that seemed impossible. We chose October 14th, 1947 as the target. We assembled a team, right? We assembled a support crew, engineers, mechanics, physicians, ground crew, radio operator, and a 24-year-old pilot. Does anybody know the pilot's name? That's right. It's Chuck Yeager. Bell Aircraft Corporation built the X-1 rocket-powered plane. It was a small bullet-shaped plane with the largest jet engine that they could fit into the smallest plane that would hold it. As it turned out, the only way to have enough fuel for the record attempt was to mount the X-1 on a larger plane to take off and carry it up to altitude. So it had to be light enough to break the speed of sound, and it couldn't carry the weight for takeoff, and then the 26,000 feet takeoff from the other plane. So they had to have another plane take it all the way up. After years of work, several prototype planes, the stage was finally set, and media crews from around the world arrived to witness this historic flight. Then on October 12th, 2 days before the flight, Chuck Yeager got thrown off of his horse and broke 2 ribs. How many of you would have quit after breaking your ribs? Yeah. Here's what's cool. Yeager went ahead with the flight without telling anybody about the accident. Because of the injury, he was unable to even close the door to the cockpit. So what did he do? He sawed off a broomstick and used it to close the door with his left hand. It's kind of crazy if you ask me. That is what we call commitment. Now, finally the day arrived. It was early in the morning, October 14th. Yeager and the X-1 were loaded under the B-29 bomber. And on their way, they went to make history. So as they flew up, they hit 26,000 feet. Yeager and the X-1 were released from the bomber, and that rocket motor was ignited. Like out of a slingshot, he sped away from the B-29. As he accelerated away from the bomber, he called out his speed on the radio to those listening on the ground. He was saying 550, 600 miles per hour, 610, 620, 630. He radios down, hey guys, the shaking's getting pretty bad up here. All the glass gauges are starting to break. And what did the ground crew say to him? They said, you can do it, Chuck. This plane was built to handle that stress. Keep going, they said. With a deep breath, Yeager put his thrust in the designers, and he pushed the throttle forward. 640, 650, 6... The radio went dead. Suddenly, they heard a sound that had never been heard before in mankind. Boom. The explosion echoed throughout the valley. They quietly looked at each other in shock and astonishment. Chuck's wife began to cry. After several seconds of silence, on the radio they heard 670, 680, 690, 700, 710 miles per hour. He had made it. The crowd erupted in cheers because what they had done is they had just made a historic day in aviation history. Now, I want you to think about how this applies to your life. Has anybody in the room maybe ever set a goal that seemed impossible? I mean, you think about it, 1945, just over 30-ish years, maybe 32, before the Wright brothers took their first flight, we're making a goal to break the speed of sound. Now, the one thing I want you to notice here about how unique is that you notice how when they set the goal, they didn't figure out the how? No, they set the goal. Even though it was impossible, they set that goal. What is the second thing they do? They built their team. Engineers, physician, maintenance crew, ground crew, and a pilot. They had to build it. They had to test it. It took 2 years of prototypes to get the right one. So they decided on a goal and they built a team. After that, right, they built a team. Now, for those of you in the room, you might be a single agent, a mega agent, a team leader. We all have a team. Could be your lenders, could be your attorneys, could be your appraisers, could be your buyer's agents, could be your listing agents, could be your team leader, assistant team leader. We all have a team. But what happened? They decided on that goal. They built their team, and then what happened? Chuck fell off his horse. Broke 2 ribs, in fact. I mean, I'd call that a setback. Has anybody ever set a goal, and then maybe along the way, everything's going right, and then what? Maybe you fall off your horse. Maybe you didn't break 2 ribs, thank goodness. But what did he do? He didn't stop, right? He got up that morning, he broke off that broom handle, and he went to fly that plane. He's in the air, and then he starts having a little bit of doubt. Anybody ever set a goal, never had a little bit of doubt around it? But what happened in that moment? I think this is really interesting that we focus on this for a second. But what happened in that moment? He leaned on his team. He wasn't the only one. He leaned on that team for support. And what did they say? Chuck, we got you. We built this for the stress. And I believe each and every one of you are built for the goals that you've set for yourself. And what did they do? They broke the speed of sound. So the question is today, how do you apply this in your life? What is a goal, right, that seems impossible that you just need to take today to set? Don't worry about the how right now. Just set the goal and let your mind go to work on how to get it done.